Right, the other day I showed how I repaired my Setra rifle, this Spanish rifle. It's a vintage air rifle, and I showed in that video the various things that I did to actually repair this one. It worked very well for a period of time and then stopped working again, so I've stripped it down again and I've made some new parts. I've made a new hammer, a new pump, piston and seal, and I've put a new spring in for the actual hammer. I couldn't actually machine this hammer here because it's so hard. What I had to do was make up another hammer which would actually fit this one. This is the old one, so I made one with a larger diameter bore at the back to fit this spring here, and I made it slightly shorter and a little bit lighter. I made a new brass non-return valve which is from the pump to the reservoir chamber. So the pump pumps the air through that one into the reservoir chamber, and the non-return valve obviously stops the air from going back out. And I put the O-ring back in that I said I took out and replaced with the PTFE seal that I made. And this one does actually work alright. The PTFE one was okay, but the O-ring is better. I thought it put the valve assembly out of position, but it doesn't. It was a whole combination of problems with this gun to actually get right. And one of the main faults, which I didn't realise from the beginning, was the actual hammer spring. This one had become lazy, and that's what was causing the air to stay in the chamber after the gun was fired, or in the actual reservoir, should I say. And this is the original pump internal part for the gun, and I've taken this one out because I obviously couldn't get a new rubber seal for it. I did put a PTFE seal on there with an O-ring, and that did work for a period of time, but I did find that in the end it was pumping the air in, and on the reverse stroke it was actually pulling the air on a suction on the non-return valve, so that wasn't any good. So I remade this part here as well out of a piece of 6mm studding, because this is 6mm thread, and the new part obviously just screws straight into the other end of the pump assembly and locks on. I made this part out of brass here with a high pressure leather seal that I made on the lathe. And I must admit that I should have done that in the first place. The O-ring on the PTFE was no good and wouldn't have worked properly anyway, because like I say, it was sucking the air backwards. I've made a parachute type pump leather seal on the pump now, or on this type of assembly, and that obviously flares out a bit on the pump stroke, and then on the reverse pump stroke it folds in a little bit to allow the air to go past, filling the pump chamber, ready to pump it forward again. And if you watched my first video on this Setra air rifle, I made the actual valve seal as well that goes inside. That all works perfectly. The hammer was actually very easy to make there. I just copied the dimensions of that. I didn't need to put the angle on this one. I just made it straight on the front end to clear the internal parts. And it's a bit lighter, and with this new high power spring it actually pushes that hammer forward and actually clears the reservoir completely of air, and it's ready to pump again. So in this video I'm going to show you how you can actually make a high pressure leather parachute type pump seal or washer, and how you can actually machine a high pressure pump seal on the Chinese Mini Lathe. Right, so to make this pump assembly, all I need to do is basically copy this in some form. This is 6mm thread, so I've got a piece of 3/4 inch diameter brass bar, and I've drilled and tapped it through for 6mm thread, and this is about 40mm long. And I've cut a piece of 6mm threaded studding the right length, and I've put a connector nut on there, a long connector nut, 6mm. You can get these on eBay. And this one will now screw onto that one with a bit of Loctite in the back there in the thread. Just some Loctite sealant. You don't need to actually lock it on there because you use this connector nut here to actually lock it on. So tighten that one up with a spanner nice and tight, and that one will remain in position. And that's roughly the right length, and if you have a thread all the way through here, you have plenty of room for adjustment. So the original pump assembly is about 10th thou larger on this diameter here, but that doesn't matter at all because this diameter doesn't actually come in contact with the bore of the pump chamber, so it doesn't really matter what this diameter is as long as it's somewhere near. It's the actual pump seal that comes into contact with that bore. So now for the pump, I'm going to make the high pressure leather seal, and I've got this excellent belt here. The buckle is broken on it, so this one will do. It's nice and supple leather, and you can use these for making all types of pump seals. I've made tilly lamp ones out of leather like this, so if you have any old belts or handbags or anything with good leather, it's actually worth keeping. And I normally use punches like this to actually punch out a piece of leather, but this is the largest size that I've got and it's not large enough for this job. So what I do is get a piece of pipe, the diameter that I actually want, and then I go around here on a disc sander until the edge is nice and sharp. I then place the leather belt on a piece of plywood like that, a rough old piece of wood that you don't need, and then I put the pipe in the centre of that belt there, as close to the other hole that I've taken out already, and then I use a soft mallet because I don't want to damage the other end of the pipe, and I keep banging this until it goes through. And you can tilt it round like this so it actually cuts through on the diameter like that. Until it cuts it out like that. A little bit more on that edge. And I need 2 pieces like that for this pump assembly. Next I use my punch tool here and eye it up so it's dead centre or near enough. And punch out for where the bolt's got to go through. So next I have a 6mm Allen bolt, the thin head type that you get on a lot of furniture items, with a washer, and I screw the seals onto that one with the shiny part of the belt facing forward, and the same with both of those. And that one screws onto the end of the pump assembly. So it's like that. So next I get a piece of brass, or this is an oil light bush. It's a bronze bush, an old bush out of my Myford countershaft assembly. I keep all the old parts like this, and this one's come in handy already. I've bored it out so it actually fits nice and loosely over the actual diameter here, and then I've bored out the front bore here a bit bigger with a very large chamfer on the front there, so that one can go down over the pump like that. And then I place the pump assembly in the drawers of the Chinese Mini Lathe and just very lightly clamp down onto that diameter there, so the assembly can actually move backwards and forwards in there without it actually scratching the diameter. So at this stage the assembly can push back into the jaws like that, so that the jaws come up against the shoulder of the bush on the front there. I can then bring the tailstock forward and make sure I've got enough room to wind it, and then I can literally force that assembly through the oil light bush there, or the brass if you make it out of brass. And cause that leather to actually be pushed over as far as you can. And occasionally you pull it forward again and pull the bush back there and manipulate that leather down a bit like that, and then put it back up against that and keep working it like that until you can actually push it in as far as possible. And it doesn't matter if it's a bit misshapen at this stage. All you're doing basically is pushing it into the parachute type position. Like that. And if you want to, you can actually add a few drops of silicone grease to the back of the leather there, and basically just keep working it like that. and that's about far enough. And then just check the Allen bolt is nice and tight again, and then tighten down on the actual diameter of that brass. So push it in a bit like that, tighten down, and then I just use an ordinary turning tool. You can use HSS or carbide, it doesn't matter at all really. And just skim the excess off on the top here. So now I'm going to take it down a little bit more, but I'm going to leave the front end and take it down from the front end at a slight angle. You can use your compound slide to do that, but I've actually got used to using my tool holder without the tool post without the compound slide, and as I wind it in I can actually wind it across as well and get a rough angle like that. And what I'm doing now is just checking that it's going to actually push in far enough when I actually assemble it into the chamber, or the actual pump chamber of the rifle, and that one looks good. If it's not, you'd actually just bring it back to the lathe like this and do that angle a little bit more on your compound slide, or like I'm doing there by winding both handles in at the same time. And that way you can get a high pressure pump seal like that. And when it actually goes into the rifle, you put it in with a bit of silicone grease or silicone oil. Just soak that into the leather and push the edges down like that as you push the pump into the actual rifle. And that's how I made the leather seal for the Setra. And there are many different ways of actually making these pump seals, but I've found this is the best way to actually make a very thick one, which is able to withstand the very high pressure of a pump on a pneumatic rifle. And if you're new to pneumatic pump up rifles, the way these work is when you actually pump them forward, the air goes into this part here, the actual bore of this leather part here, and it actually flares the leather out, so it actually hits the diameter of the actual pump chamber and seals as it goes down. And when you withdraw the pump on the backward stroke, this pushes in and allows the air forward or go past the actual leather seal, so it fills the chamber again, ready to pump again. So you can actually see the angle on that one. The Allen bolt is nicely tucked inside, and that one's a perfect job. And for a pneumatic air rifle like this with a pump, I think the leather washers are about the best you can get, or the leather seal should I say. So that's the spare pump I've got now, or the spare pump assembly, and inside you can see the workings of the pump with the brass end there. It's got some molly slip grease on that to actually make it nice and smooth, but it works absolutely perfectly.